You killed my father, and now you want me to call you boss? Vincent Russo pressed his body against the cold brick wall outside the warehouse office, his breath catching in his throat. The voice belonged to Marco De Luca, his most trusted lieutenant. The kid he'd raised from nothing after taking him in 15 years ago. The kid whose father, he'd been told, died in a car accident. Your father was a rat, Marco. He was going to bring down the entire organization. That was Tommy the Knife Moretti, his underboss, his right-hand man for 20 years. Vincent's heart pounded against his ribs as the pieces started falling into place. Vinny doesn't know. He can never know. That accident I arranged, he thinks it was just bad luck. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Vincent felt his world tilting on its axis. Johnny De Luca hadn't been just another soldier. He'd been Vincent's childhood friend, his confidant, the man who'd stood beside him when they started building their empire in the streets of Little Italy 40 years ago. When Johnny died in that fiery crash on the Brooklyn Bridge in 2010, Vincent had mourned him like a brother. He'd taken in Marco, Johnny's 10-year-old son, because he couldn't bear to see the kid end up in the foster system. He'd taught him everything, groomed him to eventually take over the family, and it had all been a lie. When do we move? Marco's voice had changed now, colder, harder. When do we take him out? Soon, Tommy replied. But we need to be smart about it. Vinny's still got loyalists. Big Tony, Frankie Bones, the Castellano brothers, they'd go to war for him. We need to turn them first, one by one. Make them see that he's getting old, that he's losing his edge. Once they're on our side, we arrange an accident. Something clean, something that looks natural. Vincent's hand moved instinctively to the .45 tucked in his waistband. He could end this right now, burst through that door and put bullets in both their heads. 20 years ago, that's exactly what he would have done. But at 65, with 3 decades of running the Russo crime family behind him, he'd learned that violence wasn't always the answer. Sometimes you had to think, to plan, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. He backed away from the door slowly, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. The warehouse was one of his legitimate fronts, a distribution center for imported olive oil and wine from Sicily. He knew every inch of this place, every shadow, every exit. He slipped out the same way he'd come in, through the loading dock entrance that the security cameras didn't cover. Outside, the November wind cut through his cashmere coat as he walked to his black Cadillac Escalade, parked 2 blocks away. His driver, Paulie, jumped out to open the door, but Vincent waved him off. "Give me a minute." He stood there on the corner of Metropolitan Avenue, watching the traffic flow by, the neon signs of Queens flickering in the early evening darkness. This neighborhood had changed so much since he was a kid. The old Italian social clubs were gone, replaced by hipster coffee shops and artisan bakeries. The world was moving on, and maybe Tommy was right. Maybe he was getting old, but old didn't mean stupid, and it certainly didn't mean weak. Vincent pulled out his phone and made a call. "Sal, it's me. I need you to put together a file on Tommy Moretti. Everything. Bank accounts, properties, who he's been meeting with, phone records. I want to know every move he's made in the last 6 months." He paused, listening. "No, don't tell anyone. This stays between us. And Sal, I need it by tomorrow night." Salvatore Gianelli had been the family's consigliere for 30 years. If anyone could dig up dirt quietly, it was him. Vincent ended the call and finally got into the car. "Home, boss?" Paulie asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "No, take me to Maria's restaurant." Maria's was a small Italian place in the Bronx, tucked away on a quiet street where tourists never ventured. It had been his and Johnny De Luca's favorite spot back in the day. They'd sit in the back booth for hours, planning jobs, settling disputes, dreaming about building an empire. After Johnny died, Vincent couldn't bring himself to go back for years. But lately, he'd started visiting again, sitting in that same booth, ordering the same dish Johnny always got, bucatini alla matriciana. Tonight, he needed to think, and he needed to remember his old friend. The restaurant was nearly empty when he arrived. Maria herself, now in her 70s, greeted him with a warm hug. "Vincent, I wasn't expecting you tonight. Last-minute decision, Maria. Is my booth available? For you, always." He settled into the worn leather seat, the same one he'd sat in countless times. The restaurant hadn't changed much. Same red-checkered tablecloths, same photos of Italy on the walls, same smell of garlic and tomatoes filling the air. It was like stepping back in time. Maria brought him a glass of Chianti without asking. The usual. "Please." As she walked away, Vincent let his mind wander back to that night in 2010. Johnny had called him, said he needed to talk about something important. They'd arranged to meet at the warehouse, the same warehouse where Vincent had just overheard the truth, but Johnny never showed up. 2 hours later, Vincent got the call about the accident. Single-car collision, vehicle went through the bridge railing, burst into flames. The body was so badly burned they had to use dental records to identify him. Now Vincent wondered, had Johnny been on his way to warn him about something, about Tommy? The timing had always bothered him, but he'd been too grief-stricken to question it deeply. He'd accepted the police report, accepted the accident story, because he couldn't bear to think otherwise. What else had he been blind to? What other lies had he swallowed? His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter, Angela. "Dad, are you coming to dinner Sunday? The kids miss you." Vincent smiled despite everything. Angela was his pride and joy. A successful lawyer in Manhattan, married to a doctor, 2 beautiful children. She'd grown up knowing her father was in import-export, and she'd never asked too many questions. He'd made sure his business never touched her life, never stained her innocence. That was his one true success, the thing he was most proud of. He texted back, "Wouldn't miss it, princess." Maria returned with his pasta, and Vincent ate slowly, savoring each bite. He needed to be methodical now, needed to think this through carefully. Tommy and Marco weren't just planning a simple hit, they were planning a coup. That meant they had support, maybe more than they'd revealed in that conversation. He needed to find out who else was involved, who he could still trust. Big Tony Calabrese had been with him since the beginning, a loyal soldier who'd taken a bullet for him back in '98. Frankie Bones was newer, but had proven himself time and again. The Castellano brothers ran his operations in New Jersey and had always kicked up their share without complaint. But loyalty could be bought, especially if someone thought you were weak. Vincent finished his meal and left cash on the table, including a generous tip. As he walked back to the car, his phone rang. It was Sal. "That was quick," Vincent said. "I got curious and started digging right away. Boss, you're not going to like what I found." "Tell me." "Tommy's been moving money, lots of it. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, and he's been meeting with Danny Russo." Vincent's blood ran cold. Danny Russo was his nephew, his younger brother's kid. He'd brought him into the organization 5 years ago, given him a crew, shown him the ropes. "Are you sure?" "Positive." They've met at least a dozen times in the past 3 months, always at that steakhouse in Manhattan, the one Danny likes. Vincent leaned against the car, feeling suddenly very tired. "What about Marco?" "Marco's clean on paper, but I'm still digging. Boss, how deep does this go?" "I don't know yet. Keep working on it. And Sal, watch your back. If they know I'm asking questions, I'm always careful, boss. You know that." Vincent ended the call and got into the car. "Polly, take me home. The long way." As they drove through the city streets, Vincent stared out at the lights of New York, thinking about empires and loyalty, about trust and betrayal. He'd built this organization from nothing, turned it into one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. He'd survived wars with other families, FBI investigations, ambitious rivals trying to take his crown. But he'd never expected the knife to come from within his own house. The Escalade pulled up to his estate in Staten Island, a sprawling property behind high walls and security gates. Vincent had lived here for 20 years, raised his daughter here, buried his wife in the family plot on the grounds after cancer took her 10 years ago. It was supposed to be his sanctuary, the one place where he felt safe. Now it felt like a prison. He walked through the front door and poured himself a scotch in his study, a room lined with books he'd actually read, leather furniture he'd chosen himself, photos of his family on every surface. This was who he really was. Not the feared mobster, not the cold-blooded killer, but a father, a grandfather, a man who loved literature and opera and Sunday dinners with his daughter. But that man would have to wait. Right now, he needed to be Vincent the Hammer Russo, the man who'd earned his reputation by crushing anyone who stood in his way. He sat down at his desk and opened a locked drawer, pulling out a leather-bound journal. For 30 years, he'd kept detailed records of every major decision, every significant event in the organization. It was insurance, leverage, and now it might be his salvation. He flipped through the pages, looking for anything about Johnny DeLuca's death, any detail he might have missed. There, on a page dated October 2010, Johnny's accident seemed suspicious. Car brand new, just serviced, weather clear. Johnny was a careful driver. Tommy handled the police report, said it was open and shut. Need to trust my people. Vincent had forgotten writing that. He'd pushed aside his suspicions because Tommy had been so reassuring, so solid. Because he'd needed someone to lean on after losing his best friend. Now he saw it for what it was, manipulation. Tommy had been there, ready with explanations, steering him away from asking too many questions. How long had Tommy been planning this? Had he been betraying him from the start, or had ambition poisoned him along the way? Vincent closed the journal and took a long drink of scotch. Tomorrow he would start putting the pieces together. Tomorrow he would figure out who was loyal and who was plotting against him. Tomorrow he would begin planning his counterattack. But tonight he allowed himself to feel the weight of betrayal, the pain of discovering that the men he trusted most in the world wanted him dead. He raised his glass in a silent toast to Johnny DeLuca, wherever he was. I should have listened to my gut, old friend. I should have dug deeper. But I promise you this, I'll make them pay for what they did to you. And I'll make sure Marco knows the truth about his father. Vincent drained his glass and stood up, walking to the window that overlooked his property. Somewhere out there, Tommy and Marco were probably celebrating, thinking they'd gotten away with it, thinking the old man was too blind and too trusting to see what was happening right under his nose. They were wrong. Vincent Russo hadn't survived 4 decades in this life by being blind or trusting. He'd survived by being smarter, more ruthless, and more patient than anyone else. And now they were going to learn why people still spoke his name in whispers, why men twice Marco's size crossed the street when they saw him coming, why even the other families treated him with cautious respect. They wanted to take his empire. Let them try. But first, he was going to make them understand exactly who they were dealing with. The most feared mobster in New York wasn't hiding behind doors anymore. He was about to step out of the shadows and remind everyone why fear was the most powerful weapon of all. Vincent Russo pulled out his phone and started making calls. By the time the sun rose over New York City, his chess pieces would be in position. And when Tommy and Marco made their next move, he'd be ready. The game had changed, but it was far from over. Vincent spent a sleepless night in his study, chain-smoking cigars and making careful calculations. By dawn, he'd created a list of names, men whose loyalty he needed to test, men whose movements needed to be watched, men who might be part of the conspiracy. The first call he made was to Big Tony Calabresi at 6 a.m. "Boss, everything okay?" Tony's voice was thick with sleep. "Meet me at the gym in an hour. Come alone." "Sure thing, boss. Is there—" Vincent hung up. If Tony was part of the plot, that would be enough to spook him into making a mistake. If he was loyal, he'd understand the urgency. The gym was another of Vincent's legitimate businesses, an old-school boxing club in Brooklyn where he'd trained as a young man. It opened at 7 a.m., but Vincent had a key. He arrived early, standing in the empty ring, remembering when he'd fought here 50 years ago, hungry and desperate to prove himself. Big Tony showed up at 6:55 alone as instructed. He was a massive man, 6'4" and close to 300 pounds, with hands like sledgehammers. Despite his size, he moved with surprising grace as he climbed into the ring. "What's going on, Vinny?" Vincent noticed Tony had called him by his first name, not boss or Mr. Russo. That was either a good sign, the intimacy of an old friendship, or a bad one, the familiarity of someone who didn't respect his authority anymore. "How's the family, Tony?" Vincent asked, dodging the question. "Good. Maria's got the grandkids this weekend. Little Anthony's starting Little League next month." "That's good. That's real good." Vincent circled slowly, his hands behind his back. "You remember when we took down the Genovese crew in 2004? When they tried to muscle in on our waterfront operations?" Tony's brow furrowed. "Yeah, of course. That was a war. We lost 3 good men. You took a bullet for me that night. Right through the shoulder." "I'd do it again," Tony said without hesitation. "You know that." Vincent stopped circling and looked Tony directly in the eyes. "Would you? Even now? Even if someone offered you more money, more territory, more power?" Tony's face hardened. "What the hell are you asking me, Vinny?" "I'm asking if you're still with me, because things are about to get complicated, and I need to know who I can trust." "You can trust me," Tony said firmly. "You've always been able to trust me." "What's happened?" Vincent studied his face for a long moment, looking for any sign of deception. All he saw was concern and loyalty. His instincts told him Tony was clean. "Someone's making a move against me, someone close. I can't tell you who yet, but I need you to be my eyes and ears. Can you do that?" "Absolutely. Who do you want me to watch?" "Everyone, especially Tommy and Marco." Tony's eyes widened. "Tommy? Boss? That's—" "I know what it sounds like, but I've got my reasons. Just watch them. See who they're talking to, where they're going. Don't let them know you're watching." "Jesus, Vinny, if Tommy's turning—" Tony shook his head. "What do you need from me?" "Your loyalty, your silence, and your help when the time comes. You've got it, all of it." They shook hands, and Vincent felt a small measure of relief. One ally confirmed. Now he needed to test the others. Over the next 3 days, Vincent conducted similar meetings with key members of his organization. Frankie Bones met him at a construction site in Queens. The Castellano brothers came to his house for dinner. Each meeting was designed to gauge loyalty, to see who was still truly with him. Most of them checked out, but there were troubling signs. Danny Russo, his nephew, was evasive when Vincent asked him about his recent activities. Carmine the Rat Delgado, who ran his loan sharking operations, seemed nervous and distracted. Vincent added both names to his list of suspects. Meanwhile, Sal continued digging, building a comprehensive picture of Tommy's financial dealings. The underboss had been siphoning money for at least 2 years, setting up a network of accounts and businesses that would allow him to operate independently. He was preparing for life after Vincent, or more accurately, preparing to take over. On the 4th day, Vincent called a meeting of his capos, the lieutenants who ran different aspects of the organization. It was a regular monthly meeting, nothing suspicious. They gathered in the back room of a social club in Little Italy, 12 men sitting around a table discussing business. Tommy ran the meeting as he usually did. He talked about collections, about territorial disputes with a Russian crew in Brighton Beach, about a new gambling operation they were starting in Atlantic City. He was smooth, professional, showing no sign that he was plotting to kill everyone's boss. Vincent watched him carefully, this man he'd trusted for 2 decades. Tommy was in his early 50s, handsome in a rough way, with silver-streaked black hair and expensive suits. He'd always been ambitious, but Vincent had thought that ambition was channeled into building the family, not destroying it. When had it changed? When had loyalty turned to betrayal? "Vincent, you want to say anything?" Tommy asked, turning to him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just one thing," Vincent said, standing up. "I want to thank you all for your continued loyalty. These are challenging times. Other families are getting weaker, falling apart from the inside. The Russians are pushing, the Albanians are getting aggressive, and the feds are always watching. But we've stayed strong because we're united, because we trust each other." He paused, letting his words sink in. "That trust is everything. It's what separates us from common criminals. We're a family, and family doesn't turn on family. Remember that." The men around the table nodded and murmured agreement. Tommy's smile had frozen on his face. Marco, sitting to his right, wouldn't meet Vincent's eyes. Vincent sat back down. "That's all I wanted to say. Carry on, Tommy." The meeting continued, but the mood had shifted. Vincent had sent a message without saying anything directly. Now he needed to wait and see who would panic, who would make a mistake. That night Sal called with an update. "Boss, I've been tracking Marco's movements. He's been meeting with someone interesting. Alex Petrov." Vincent's jaw tightened. Alex Petrov was a mid-level operator in the Russian mafia, ambitious and violent. "What are they talking about?" "I don't know yet. But Petrov's been expanding aggressively. If Marco's making a deal with the Russians..." "Then this is bigger than I thought," Vincent finished. "Keep digging, Sal. I need to know what they're planning." Vincent hung up and poured himself another scotch. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about Tommy and Marco taking over. They were planning to partner with the Russians, maybe even merge operations. It would destroy everything Vincent had built, everything he'd fought for. The Russian mob didn't play by the old rules. They were savage, unpredictable, willing to hurt innocent people to make a point. If they took over his operations, his neighborhood would turn into a war zone. The businesses he protected would be squeezed dry. The people who depended on him for jobs and security would suffer. He couldn't let that happen. Vincent walked to his safe and pulled out an old photo album. Inside were pictures from the early days, him and Johnny DeLuca as young men, hungry and fierce. Photos of Angela as a baby, held by her mother. Pictures of made men long dead, killed in wars Vincent had fought and won. He stopped at one particular photo, his initiation ceremony 42 years ago. He was 23 years old, standing in a room full of men who would become legends. The boss back then, Salvatore Saliscius Romano, had pricked Vincent's finger and let the blood drip onto a picture of a saint, then set it on fire while Vincent held it, swearing his oath. "We're not a club. We're not a gang," Saliscius had told him. "We're a family bound by blood and honor. You betray the family, you die. Simple as that." Vincent had lived by that code his entire life. He'd killed men who broke it, who turned informant, who stole from the family. He'd been ruthless because the code demanded it. Now the code demanded that he kill Tommy Moretti and Marco DeLuca. The question was how to do it without starting a civil war, without giving the Russians an opening to move in, without destroying everything he'd built. He needed a plan. and he needed help from someone outside the organization, someone who couldn't be compromised. Vincent picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 5 years. "Hello?" The voice was older, raspier than he remembered. "Don Carmine, it's Vincent Russo." There was a long pause. Carmine Battaglia was the semi-retired boss of a New Jersey family, a contemporary of Vincent's who'd stepped back from daily operations after a stroke. But he still had influence, still commanded respect. "Vincent, it's been a long time. Too long. I need to meet with you. It's urgent." "Is this about the rumors I've been hearing?" Vincent's stomach dropped. "What rumors?" "That your house is divided, that Tommy Moretti thinks he should be boss, that the Russians smell blood in the water." Carmine coughed. "You know how word spreads in our world. The rumors are true. I need advice, Don Carmine, and maybe more than advice. Come to my house tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Come alone." "Thank you." Vincent ended the call and sat back in his chair. If the other families knew about the coup attempt, that meant Tommy and Marco had been talking too much, bragging about their plans. That was good. Arrogance led to mistakes. But it also meant the clock was ticking. He needed to act soon, before the situation spiraled completely out of control. He spent the rest of the night planning, making notes, thinking through every possible scenario. By the time the sun rose, he had the outline of a strategy. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but it was his best shot at saving his empire. The next day, Vincent drove to New Jersey alone, as instructed. Don Carmine lived in a modest house in a quiet suburb, nothing like the estate Vincent owned. But appearances were deceiving. Carmine was worth twice what Vincent was. His investments spread across legitimate businesses that generated steady income. An old man answered the door and led Vincent to a study where Carmine sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over his legs, despite the warm afternoon. "Vincent," Carmine said, extending a trembling hand, "you look tired. It's been a rough week. Sit. Tell me everything." Vincent sat and told the story. Johnny's death, what he'd overheard, Sal's discoveries, the meetings with the Russians. He held nothing back. Carmine was old school, bound by the same codes Vincent lived by. He wouldn't betray a confidence. When Vincent finished, Carmine was quiet for a long time, his rheumy eyes staring into the distance. "You know what you have to do," Carmine finally said. "I know, but I need to do it smart." "Smart would have been seeing this coming 2 years ago," Carmine said bluntly. "But you were too trusting. You treated Tommy like a brother, Marco like a son. That's the problem with our generation, Vincent. We have too much heart. The young ones, they're all business, no loyalty." "So what do I do?" Carmine leaned forward. "You make an example. You remind everyone what happens when you betray the family. But you do it in a way that doesn't start a war. You need the Commission's blessing." The Commission was the governing body of the major crime families, established decades ago to prevent the kind of bloody conflicts that had nearly destroyed organized crime in the past. If Vincent could get their approval for what he was planning, it would legitimize his actions and prevent retaliation. "How do I get their blessing?" Vincent asked. "You present evidence. You show them that Tommy and Marco aren't just betraying you. They're threatening the stability of all our organizations by bringing in the Russians. The Commission hates the Russians. They break all the rules, bring too much heat. If you can prove Tommy's making deals with them, the Commission will give you permission to handle it however you want." Vincent nodded slowly. It made sense. "I need more evidence." "Then get it. And Vincent, move fast. Once they know you're on to them, they'll either back off or accelerate their timeline. Either way, you'll lose your advantage." Vincent stood and shook Carmine's hand. "Thank you, Don Carmine. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you're still breathing." Vincent drove back to New York with renewed purpose. He called Sal from the car. "I need proof that Tommy's working with the Russians. Photos, recordings, anything concrete." "I'm on it, boss." Next, he called Big Tony. "Tomorrow night I want you to follow Marco. Don't let him see you. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to." "You got it." Finally, he called his daughter. "Angela, baby, I need a favor." "Dad, you sound serious. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just need you to take the kids somewhere for a week. A vacation. My treat." "Dad, what's going on?" "Nothing for you to worry about. I just want you and the grandkids safe and happy. Please, sweetheart." There was a long pause. "Okay, we'll go to Disney World. The kids have been asking." "Perfect. Book it tonight. First class, best hotel. Send me the bill." "I will. Dad, be careful, okay? Always, princess. I love you. I love you too." Vincent ended the call and felt a weight lift from his chest. Whatever happened next, at least his daughter and grandchildren would be far away from it. Now it was time to finish this. Over the next 48 hours, pieces fell into place. Big Tony tailed Marco to 3 separate meetings with Alex Petrov, photographing them together. Sal managed to plant a bug in Tommy's car and recorded conversations that confirmed the conspiracy. Tommy talking about timelines, about which capos would support them, about how they'd structure the new organization. Most damning was a recording of Tommy talking to Danny Russo. "Once the old man's gone, we'll control everything. You'll get the Jersey operations. Marco gets Brooklyn and Queens. I take Manhattan and Staten Island. And Petrov gets the docks for his shipping operations. Everybody wins." "Except Uncle Vincent," Danny said nervously. "Vincent's had his time. This is the future, kid. You're either with us or you're with a dead man." Vincent listened to that recording 3 times, his anger building with each playback. Danny, his brother's son, the boy he'd mentored and protected, had chosen ambition over family. They all had. He called an emergency meeting of the commission for the following night. The bosses of the 5 major families gathered in a private room at a restaurant in Manhattan, the same place they'd been meeting for 30 years. Vincent presented his evidence, the recordings, the photos, Sal's financial records showing Tommy's hidden accounts. The bosses listened in grim silence. When Vincent finished, the most senior among them, a 90-year-old man named Giuseppe Mancini, spoke. "This is disturbing. Not just the betrayal, but the involvement with the Russians. That cannot be tolerated." The other bosses nodded their agreement. "What are you asking for, Vincent?" Giuseppe asked. "Permission to handle this internally, and a guarantee that no one will retaliate or interfere." Giuseppe looked around the table. Each boss nodded. "You have our blessing. Do what needs to be done. But Vincent, when you strike, make sure it's final. We can't have this dragging out, creating instability." "It will be final," Vincent promised. He left the meeting with everything he needed. Now came the hard part, the actual execution. Vincent spent the next day making preparations. He reached out to old allies, men who'd retired from active service but still owed him favors. He positioned his loyal capos, Big Tony, Frankie Bones, the Castellano brothers, telling them only what they needed to know. He moved money, secured safe houses, arranged for alibis. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake, and the whole thing could fall apart. On Saturday night, Vincent called a special meeting at the warehouse, the same warehouse where he'd overheard Tommy and Marco plotting. He told Tommy it was about the Atlantic City expansion, that he wanted to discuss it before making a final decision. Tommy agreed immediately, probably thinking it was a chance to push Vincent toward retirement. Vincent arrived early with Big Tony and 4 other trusted men. They swept the building for bugs, locked all the exits except one, and positioned themselves strategically. When Tommy and Marco arrived with Danny Russo and 2 other conspirators, they walked into a trap. "What's this about, Vinny?" Tommy asked, his eyes scanning the room, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Don't," Vincent said quietly. "You'll be dead before your hand reaches your gun." Tommy froze. Marco went pale. Danny looked like he might vomit. "You know, don't you?" Tommy said finally. "How long have you known?" "Long enough. I heard you, Tommy, right here in this warehouse. You and Marco, planning my death, talking about how you killed Johnny DeLuca." Marco's eyes widened. "Vinny, I didn't—" "Shut up," Vincent said coldly. "You stood in my house, ate my food, called me family, knowing you were going to kill me. Knowing your father, the man I mourned, was murdered by the man standing next to you. Johnny was going to bring down the whole organization," Tommy shouted. "He was talking to the feds. That's a lie, and you know it. Johnny was loyal. He found out you were stealing, and you killed him before he could tell me." Vincent took a step forward. "How long have you been planning this, Tommy? How many years have you been pretending to be my friend while you robbed me blind?" Tommy's jaw clenched. "You're right about one thing. I've been planning this for years. Because you're weak, Vinny. You're stuck in the past, playing by rules that don't matter anymore. The old ways are dying. I was going to build something new, something stronger. With the Russians? With whoever could help us grow. This is business, Vinny. Nothing personal." Vincent laughed bitterly. "Nothing personal? You killed my best friend. You corrupted his son. You turned my nephew against me. You planned to murder me in my own organization. And you say it's nothing personal?" "So what now?" Tommy asked. "You gonna kill us? That'll start a war you can't win." "No, it won't. I've been to the commission. I showed them the evidence. Your deals with Petrov, your stolen money, your conspiracy. They gave me permission to handle this however I want." "There won't be a war, Tommy. There won't even be questions. Everyone will understand that you broke the rules and you paid the price." Fear finally showed on Tommy's face. He looked around, calculating his chances, but 6 guns were pointed at him and his men. There was no way out. "Vinny," Danny said, his voice cracking. "Uncle Vinny, please. I made a mistake. I didn't want to—" "You made a choice," Vincent interrupted. "You chose money and power over family, over blood." "That's not a mistake, Danny. That's betrayal." He turned to Marco, the young man he'd raised, the son he'd never had. "And you, Marco. I loved you like my own. I taught you everything. I gave you the truth about this life, the honor, the loyalty, the codes we live by, and you threw it all away." "My father," Marco started. "Your father was a good man who died because of him," Vincent pointed at Tommy. "Johnny DeLuca would be ashamed of what you've become." Tears ran down Marco's face, but Vincent felt nothing, no pity, no regret, just cold, hard certainty. "This is how it ends," Vincent said. "You 3 had a meeting at the docks tonight to finalize your deal with Petrov, but the Russians double-crossed you. There was a shootout. You all died. It's tragic, but these things happen when you play with snakes." "You can't," Tommy started. "I already have. Petrov and 3 of his men are dead. The Russian Bratva will think you killed them. They'll be happy to accept the story that you all killed each other. Clean, simple, no blowback on the family." Vincent nodded to Big Tony. What happened next was quick and professional. 6 shots, and it was over. Vincent looked down at the bodies of the men who'd betrayed him. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just weariness and a deep sadness that it had come to this. "Clean this up," he told his men. "Make it look exactly like I said, and make sure word gets to the Russians. I want them to know that coming after my organization is a death sentence." "Yes, boss," Big Tony said. Vincent walked out of the warehouse into the cold night air. It was done. The threat was eliminated. His position was secure. But the victory felt hollow. He'd lost his best friend years ago. Tonight, he'd lost his underboss, his most promising soldier, and his nephew. 3 more names to add to the long list of people this life had cost him. Vincent got into his car and told Paulie to drive. As they crossed the bridge back to Staten Island, he thought about retirement. Maybe it was time to step back, to let a younger generation take over. Not traitors like Tommy and Marco, but good men who still understood honor and loyalty. But not yet. First, he had to rebuild, to make sure the organization was stable. He owed that much to the men who'd stayed loyal, to the memory of Johnny DeLuca, to the legacy he'd spent 40 years building. The most feared mobster in New York had just reminded everyone why that fear was well earned. But as Vincent looked at his reflection in the car window, he saw an old man, tired and alone, wondering if any of it had been worth it. His phone buzzed. A text from Angela. "At Disney. Kids are having the best time. Thank you, Dad. Love you." Vincent smiled. Maybe it had been worth it after all. Maybe everything he'd done, every hard choice, every violent night, had been to create a world where his daughter could take her children to Disney World without worrying about what her father did for a living. That was legacy enough. As the car pulled into his estate, Vincent made a decision. He'd stay for 1 more year, make sure everything was stable, then step down. He'd name a successor, someone young but wise, someone who understood both the old ways and the new realities. And then he'd retire, spend time with his grandchildren, travel to Italy, maybe write a book about the old neighborhood. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, he'd pour himself a scotch, sit in his study, and remember all the people he'd lost along the way. Johnny DeLuca, his wife Maria, the old bosses who taught him the game, the soldiers who died in wars they'd fought together. This was the cost of power, the constant price of staying on top in a world where betrayal was always 1 door away, where loyalty was the rarest commodity, where even family could become your enemy. Vincent Russo had survived because he was willing to pay that price. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he wondered if he'd paid too much. The Escalade came to a stop. Vincent got out and walked into his house, closing the door behind him. Tomorrow he'd deal with the aftermath, manage the transitions, answer questions from the other families. Tomorrow he'd be the boss again, strong and certain. But tonight he was just an old man who'd learned a hard lesson behind a warehouse door, that in this life, trust was a luxury you couldn't afford, and the people closest to you could hurt you the most. The game continued. It always did. But Vincent Russo had just played his hand masterfully, eliminating his enemies and securing his throne. For now at least he was safe, for now.